The matchstick trembled in my fingers. It had outlasted every year I'd spent in this underworld. A worn, brittle thing, the last trace of a boy I once was, a boy named Victor. I stood at the iron door, and behind me, they screamed. Marco cursed my mother, while Nico sobbed bitterly, crying out his 4-year-old daughter's name. The match caught fire, illuminating the scarred half of my face. I tossed it among them. After that, I heard nothing but the roar of the flames. But before I reached that moment, before my face became a ghost and my heart turned to ash, let me tell you how it all began, with a beat-up truck and a stupid shining dream. And now, here I am, a cell 3 steps wide, 4 steps long. Concrete walls sweating moisture through every seam. A single bulb sputters above, its weak light a cruel reminder that I'm still breathing, or what's left of breathing. Outside, rain hammers the small barred window, like someone knocking on a door no one wants to open. Rain was always my companion in hard times, as if the sky wept what my eyes couldn't. My name is Victor Moreau. I'm in my 50s now, though the mirror in my cell tells me I'm much older than that. Scars cover the right half of my face. Deep burns fuse to the skin like maps of roads I never traveled, but that found me anyway. They call me the ghost in here, not because I was good at disappearing, but because by the end, no one could recognize the man I used to be. In a few days, everything will end. They'll come at night or during the day, walk me down a long corridor, sit me on a wooden chair, and the story will be over. But before I leave, I wanted to tell it. Not to justify, not to beg for sympathy I don't deserve, but so you might understand how a beautiful dream curdles into hell. How the road to hell is paved not with good intentions, but with small steps you convince yourself are temporary. Steps you swear you'll stop taking tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. Everything started with a truck. The reek of gasoline and dust, mingling with the acrid smell of cracked leather seats, a scent that haunted my dreams for years after the truck was gone. The smell of borrowed freedom. It wasn't an ordinary truck. It was a scrap of rusted iron from the 1970s, barely holding itself together on the road. Its air conditioner blew hot air instead of cold, and its brakes were purely decorative. 3 of us sat in it. Me, Marco, and Nico, my cousins. We were 16, believing the world belonged to us, that everything we did was part of some grand game, and that the ending would be happy because we deserved it. The irony was that we shared a single wooden toothpick. Each of us would chew it for a few minutes, then pass it to the next, as if it were our sacred ritual. People would see us on the street, poor neighborhood kids in ragged clothes, with that toothpick dangling from our mouths, and assume we were dangerous gangsters. They didn't know we were just 3 idiots who couldn't afford a new toothpick for each of us, let alone a proper meal. Marco was always dreaming of big things, fancy cars, houses on the hills overlooking the bay, beautiful women. He talked about them as if they were his birthright, as if poverty were just a temporary glitch, as if the world owed him everything. Nico was the opposite, shy, anxious, always questioning whether we were doing the right thing. But his fear of Marco was stronger than his inner voice. As for me, I was the middle ground, trying to be the voice of reason, or so I thought. One day, as we drove our junker past the elite school on the nearby hill, Marco stopped at its ornate golden gates and pointed to a small boy carrying a beautiful red backpack. "Look at that backpack, Victor. Real leather, Italian, not like our plastic bags." I told him, "Forget it, Marco. We're not doing anything stupid today." But Marco had already made up his mind. He got out of the truck, walked toward the boy, and started talking with a wide smile, asking about the backpack, praising it. Then, in a lightning move, he snatched it from the boy's hand and ran back to the truck. I heard the boy scream, "Thief! Thief!" I hesitated for a moment. I watched Marco jump into the truck bed, shouting at me, "Go! Go! Move!" I stomped the gas, and the truck lurched forward, exploding with dust. The boy ran after us, crying, his voice breaking in the narrow city alley, disappearing behind us like a fleeting memory. Afterward, in the back alley, Marco was ecstatic, raising the backpack like a championship trophy. "Did you see his face? Did you see it?" Nico said in a low voice. "He was crying, Marco. He was just a little kid." Marco shrugged. "His rich daddy will buy him another one." I stayed silent. I gripped the steering wheel hard, my nails digging into the synthetic leather. Something heavy pressed against my chest, something I couldn't explain at the time. But I knew we'd crossed a line, and going back would be impossible. On the way home, I stopped the truck and looked at Marco. I said, "I've followed you into every stupid thing since we were kids. Every fight, every suspension, every punishment. But this is different. That kid didn't do anything to us." Marco laughed sarcastically. "You're too soft, Victor. That's your damn problem." I said, "Maybe I'm soft, but I'm not a thief." Marco fell silent, his smile fading. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, then said, "Fine, I'll return it tomorrow. Are you happy now?" I didn't answer. I drove on, the rough cough of the engine the only song that night. The next day, we stood outside the principal's office. Marco was still clutching the backpack, as if it were part of him. I tried to convince him to return it, but he was stubborn. The principal opened the door and looked at us with exhausted eyes, worn down from years of dealing with our problems. He said, "Come in." We entered. I tried to speak. "We found the backpack, sir. We were going to return it." The principal cut me off with a bitter laugh. "You found it. That's what you're calling it. The security cameras from the private school show your cousin stealing it." Marco tried to defend himself. "It was a joke." The principal said, "A joke? That boy's father is a city council member. He wants you arrested and expelled permanently." I felt my heart drop to the bottom of my stomach. I said desperately, "Please, sir, we'll apologize. We'll do anything. Just please don't call the police." The principal looked at me for a long time, then said sadly, "The police are already on their way." That was the moment I realized we were no longer children. We spent 3 nights in a temporary holding cell before being transferred to juvenile detention. The nights were cold, the floor concrete, and the piercing screech of the iron door kept you awake, afraid it might open at any moment and drag you to an unknown end. But the worst wasn't the cold or the fear, it was the shame. I imagined my father's face as I stood before the judge, his disappointment heavier than any sentence. The cell reeked of sweat, rust, and despair, a smell I learned to recognize before I learned to recognize the guards' faces. The smell of beginnings you know are endings. On the 4th day, a new inmate was brought in. He was young, no older than 15, but his eyes were old, weathered, as if they'd seen what only someone who'd lived a full life in a few years could see. This was Damon Cross. He sat in the corner, watching us. He was so quiet that his silence bothered me more than any shouting. Marco asked him rudely, "What are you looking at?" Damon smiled calmly and said, "Nothing. You're new here, that's obvious." Marco boasted, "And we're not afraid of you." Damon laughed. "You should be, not of me, of what's coming." He moved closer, crouched down, and said, "What are you in for?" I said hesitantly, "Stupidity, a school bag." Damon nodded. "That's how it always starts. My father started with a stolen watch. He ended up on death row." Marco was confused. "Your father's a murderer?" Damon shook his head. No, a smuggler, a good one. He was caught 3 times. The third was the last. They're executing him next month. The cell fell silent. Even the old pipes stopped, as if listening. Damon continued, "But I'm not here for that. I'm here because I was carrying product. I started at your age. I did it for my mother, because my father was inside and someone had to feed the family." I looked at him, stunned. "You're just a kid." He smiled, sadly. "That's what you don't understand. None of us are just kids anymore. In here, we're all men. Broken men." Marco asked, his voice betraying his fear, "What's your sentence?" Damon said, "I was supposed to get out when I turn 18, then transfer to adult prison, to be with my father at the end." Then he looked directly at me, as if reading something in my eyes, and said, "You're different. You have something they don't. A conscience." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't lose it. It's the only thing that will save you in this life." That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Damon's words, about my future, about the choices I hadn't made yet. But strangely, I didn't feel fear of the criminal world he described. I felt something closer to curiosity. I wondered what it would be like to be in that world, to survive, to reach the top. That was the first time I let that thought into my head. That was the first seed. I was released from juvenile detention after 3 months, carrying a file that followed me everywhere. Criminal record, they called it. I tried to work in several places, but everyone rejected me the moment they saw the paper. Their eyes said, "Criminal from childhood, will remain a criminal for life." I met Marco and Nico again, despite my father's warnings. We were lost, directionless, hopeless. One day, while wandering through a modest neighborhood, we saw a small electronics shop with a faded sign, Keller's Electronics. We decided to go in and ask for work. The shop owner was an old man in his 60s, named Mr. Frank Keller. He had a kind face and sharp blue eyes that gleamed with intelligence and experience. He wasn't married, had no children. The shop was his whole life. He looked us over for a long time, then said, "3 of you, 3 ex-juvie kids with no references and no skills. Why should I hire you?" I said with despair washing over me, "We'll work twice as hard as anyone. We'll bring customers. We'll do anything." He asked, "Why should I trust you?" I looked into his eyes and said honestly, "Because I have nowhere else to go. And I'm not a thief. Not anymore." He looked at me for a long time, and I saw something in his eyes change, as if he saw something inside me that I hadn't seen yet. He said, "All right, but you start at the bottom. Minimum pay. And if you steal anything, I'll call the police myself." We breathed a sigh of relief. I discovered a talent I didn't know I had. Selling. I could sell ice to Eskimos. I listened to the customer, knew what they wanted before they asked, and made them feel they were buying not just a device, but part of a dream. One day, a wealthy woman named Mrs. Devereaux walked in. She wore a fur coat and jewelry that sparkled like the city lights at night. Nico and I pounced on her, carrying her bags, smiling, offering water. She said, amazed, "You're angels." I smiled, "Just trying to earn our keep, ma'am." Then I took her to the air conditioners and said, "This unit is the best cooling system we have. It'll freeze water bottles in minutes." She said excitedly, "Really? I'll take it. And that television, and the washing machine." Within an hour, she'd bought half the shop's inventory. Mr. Keller was shocked. He hadn't made that much in 10 years. He told us, "All right, you're officially hired. Victor, you're the sales manager." I felt something warm in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt I belonged somewhere, that I was doing something right. 3 years passed. The shop grew, and we grew with it. I was in my 20s, a confident young man, with a smile hiding many secrets not yet born. One day, Mr. Keller walked in slowly, making his way to the office. His face was pale, his steps heavy. He said, "Victor, I need to talk to you." I sat with him and asked, "What's wrong?" He sighed. "I'm not well. I'm not young anymore, and my health is failing. But before I go, I need to settle my affairs." I expected him to will me the shop. But when he said it, I was shocked. He said, "The shop. I want to give it to you." I refused. "No, Mr. Keller. This is your life's work." He cut me off. "And it'll go to waste if you don't take it. I have no family, but I have you. You and the boys built this place. I want it to stay in good hands." I hugged him. It was the first time I'd cried in years. A week later, Mr. Keller passed away in the city hospital. I was in the shop when they called. The phone slipped from my hand. I stared blankly at the wall. Then I screamed, a scream I didn't know I had inside me. That night, Marco sat beside me in the dark shop. He said, "I'm sorry, cousin." I said hollowly, "He was like a father to me." Marco said, "I know." Then I looked at him and asked, "And now what? I have a shop, debts, and people depending on me." Marco said eagerly, "We can handle it. Together, like always." I laughed bitterly. "Together? That's what you said last time, and we ended up in jail." Marco was silent, then said in a low voice, "This time is different. I know people now, real people who can help us." I looked at him and saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Ambition laced with danger. I asked, "What kind of people?" A few weeks later, Marco took me to a warehouse on the waterfront. Rain was pouring heavily, and the city seemed to be washing itself of its sins. In the warehouse stood a man in his 20s, sharp-featured, cold-eyed. It was Damon Cross, but he was no longer the boy I'd met in juvenile detention. He was now a man, hard, professional, as if the years had carved him into a harsher version of himself. He smiled and said, "Victor, I knew you'd come someday." I said nervously, "I'm just here to talk." He laughed and said, "You're not here to talk. If you were, you wouldn't have come at night." Then he explained the game. "I'll supply the product. You move it across the bay. Clean, safe, every time." I asked, "And if something goes wrong?" He shrugged. "You take the fall. That's the deal. No names, no evidence. You're just a truck driver who made a mistake." I asked, "And the money?" He said, "Enough to pay your debts, buy another shop, build an empire." Then he paused and looked at me. "Or you can stay small, Victor. Safe, poor. But we both know you're too smart to stay poor forever." I looked at Marco, who was staring at me eagerly. I looked at Nico, who stared at the ground in shame. I finally said, "I'm in, but my way. No mistakes, no stupid risks." Damon extended his hand. "Welcome to the game, Ghost." I drove the refrigerated truck on the first night. The product was hidden inside cooling units, in the insulation, in the walls. Tension gnawed at me, but I pretended to be calm. At the checkpoint, an officer stopped me. He looked at my license, then at the truck, and asked wearily, "Where are you headed?" I said calmly, "Electronic shipment for the southern city." He waved me through. It was too easy, suspiciously easy. Afterward, I delivered the goods and collected the money. It was more than I'd ever seen in my life. I stared at the cash and said, This is more than I've ever seen." Marco laughed. "Welcome to the game, cousin. The game pays winners." 5 years passed like a quick dream. I opened 3 new branches, and I married Elena, a beautiful woman from a respectable family. The wedding was in a grand cathedral, with Marco as the best man and Nico smiling with his family. Everything seemed perfect. I remember one night clearly. I was sitting in my kitchen, Elena preparing dinner, my young son playing at my feet. I looked at him, then at the phone that kept ringing. It was Marco on the line, telling me about a new deal, new money, new danger. I stood up from the chair, kissed my son's head, and whispered to him, "I'll be back soon, little one." He looked at me with his innocent eyes and asked, "When, Daddy?" I told him, "Soon." I never made it back to that dinner. I returned home at 3 in the morning, Elena asleep, the plate still on the table, covered in foil. I didn't open it. I wasn't hungry. I felt something else. Emptiness. That was the last time I saw my son play. After that, I was always busy, always traveling, always away. When he grew up, he stopped asking about me. In the background, I was changing, growing harder, colder, more distant. The smile I used to sell appliances with became a mask, hiding my real self. One day, sitting in my office counting stacks of cash, I looked at a photo of Elena and my young son. I felt something strange, not regret, but emptiness, as if all this wealth had filled nothing inside me. That night, I came home late. Elena was waiting for me, her eyes tired. She said, "You promised you'd be here for dinner. The kids asked about you." I said tiredly, "I had work." She said quietly, "You always have work." I didn't answer. I went to the bedroom and looked in the mirror. I saw a face I didn't recognize, empty eyes, deep wrinkles. I smiled, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. I realized in that moment that I'd lost something, but I didn't yet know what it was. One night, Damon called me, his voice tense. "There's a problem. Your truck hasn't arrived. The driver, Elias, isn't answering." I felt worry grip me. Elias was my most trusted man. He'd never been late. I said, "When did this happen?" He said, 3 hours ago. He should have been here by now." I and my men went to Elias's house. It was empty. His family had vanished, furniture draped in white sheets, like shrouds. The smell of dust and emptiness hung in the air, as if life itself had withdrawn from the walls. I stood in the middle of the living room, wondering how many times Elias had sat here with his family, laughing, eating, living a life I'd never known. I growled through my teeth, "Where is he?" One of my men said, "He ran, boss, him and his family." But something bothered me. Elias wouldn't have run. He trusted me, and I trusted him. Then I remembered. Marco was the one who found Elias. Marco had vouched for him. I said coldly, "I want to speak with my cousin." I entered Marco's lavish house that night. He was sitting in the living room, pretending to be calm. Nico stood in the corner, trembling like a leaf. I asked him, "Where is Elias?" Marco feigned innocence. "I don't know. You hired him." I exploded. "Don't lie to me." I shoved him hard against the wall and shouted in his face, "I've been building this for years, and you brought me into this game. And now you tell me you don't know where Elias is? The man you vouched for?" He tried to calm me. "Victor, calm down," I said coldly. "I know everything. I know Elias was your man, your friend, and now he's gone with my product." I moved closer. "I'll ask you again. Where is he?" Marco was silent, then said in a low voice, "He sold it, sold the product, and ran. I don't know where." I shook my head. "No, you know everything." I pulled out my gun and pointed it at him. "Tell the truth, or..." Nico stepped forward, terrified. "Victor, please, he's your cousin." I looked at him coldly. "Family doesn't destroy family. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't..." My hand trembled. Then I lowered the gun. I said, "I don't have proof, but I'll find it. And when I do..." I left him trembling in his lavish living room. I traveled between southern towns for weeks until I found a lead to Elias. In a small coastal town, under relentless rain, I saw him stumble out of a bar. I followed him into a dark alley and grabbed his shoulder. The smell of rain and wet asphalt filled the alley, a smell I'd always encountered when approaching the end of something. Without knowing, That end was my whole life. I said, "Elias, we need to talk." He froze and said in a trembling voice, "Victor, I didn't know you were." I cut him off. "Where is my product? What did you do with it?" Elias trembled like a child, cowering from a storm. I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't seen before. Real fear, not of me, but of Marco. He said desperately, "It wasn't me, it was Marco. He paid me to disappear. I had nothing to do with." I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said in a hoarse voice, "Because he threatened my family, Victor. My wife, my children. He said he'd kill them in front of me if I talked." What was I supposed to do? I chose my children. Any father would have done the same. I was silent for a long time. Then I said, "You could have come to me. I would have protected you." Elias laughed bitterly. "Like you protected yourself from Marco? He blew up your truck and you're still standing here. You're not stronger than him. You're just luckier." His words cut like a blade. I didn't answer, but they stayed in my head all the way to the warehouse. I asked coldly, "Where's the product?" He said, crying, "In the warehouse, in the crossing. Marco took it there." I nodded, "Thank you." Then I turned to leave, but stopped and looked at him. "Elias, if you ever come back, I'll find you, and I'll make you wish you'd stayed disappeared." I walked away in the rain, leaving him collapsed against the bar wall. In that moment, I felt something die inside me. Not compassion, but the last remains of the man I used to be. When I reached the warehouse, I found the product there, intact, but contaminated. Marco had tampered with it, but hadn't stolen it. He'd wanted to get me in trouble with the Baron. I steeled myself and decided to confront him. I called him and said, "Marco, tomorrow, our place." He tried to apologize, but I cut him off. "Tomorrow, or I'll come to you." In the old warehouse where we'd played as children, we met for the last time as partners. I said, "I found Elias. He told me everything. About the fake theft, the contaminated product, about you, Marco." Marco shouted, "Someone had to do it. You were too weak, too naive. You were running things like a charity." I trembled with rage. "A charity? I built this from nothing, with my own hands, and you, my partner, my brother, stabbed me in the back." Marco drew his gun and shouted, "I'm taking over now. Everything. The product, the connections, everything." I laughed bitterly. "You think you can kill me and walk away?" He smiled twistedly. "No, but I can make it look like an accident. A robbery gone wrong. You've made plenty of enemies, cousin." Then he added, "But before I shoot, I want you to know something. I did this for us, for our family. You were going to lose everything anyway. I was just speeding up the process." I stared at him and said, "You're insane." He said, "Maybe, but at least I'm still standing." And he pulled the trigger. I heard the gunshot, then the shattering of glass and screeching of metal. Then a massive explosion, and I was thrown through the air, feeling heat engulf my face. Then nothing. Absolute darkness. The taste of blood and gasoline swirled in my mouth, a taste I couldn't shake for years. Every time I tried to remember something beautiful, that taste would come back to lick my dreams. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. Half my face was bandaged, machines beeping around me. Beside me stood a man in a formal suit, with a sharp, patient gaze. He was Detective Harris. I said weakly, Where am I?" He said, "The hospital. You were in a truck explosion. Your cousins tampered with your vehicle. You're lucky to be alive." Then he added, "Though lucky is a relative term." I touched my face and asked him, "What happened to me?" He said, "You'll survive, but the burns are severe. You'll have scars, permanent ones." I stared at the ceiling, walking through the corridors of my memory. I saw Marco firing, felt the explosion again. Then I heard the detective say, "Your cousins fled. We're searching, but they've disappeared. They have the product, and they're going to sell it." I asked coldly, "Why are you helping me?" He said, "Because they tried to kill you, and because you'll look in the mirror and see a monster every day for the rest of your life, and because if you don't help me, I'll make sure you end up behind bars." I was silent for a long time, then said, "What do you want me to do?" After I left the hospital, carrying my new disfigured face, I began the hunt for Marco and Nico. I avoided mirrors because seeing myself reminded me I was no longer Victor. I was something else. When I found them in an abandoned apartment in the industrial district, I stood in the shadows watching them. They were arguing, Marco shouting, Nico crying. The distant city lights crept through the broken window, tracing golden lines on their tired faces. In that moment, they both looked younger, as if the years had fallen away and they were just frightened boys back in juvenile detention. I heard Marco say, "We've lost everything. The product is gone. The money's gone. Everything." Nico said desperately, "We can run. Go south. Start over." Marco laughed sarcastically. "Start over? With what? We have nothing. Victor took everything from us." Nico said quietly, "Victor didn't take anything. We did this to ourselves." Marco stepped closer and shouted, "What did you say?" Nico stood firm and said, "You heard me. We did this. You started it. You betrayed him, and now we're paying the price." Marco shouted, "You're just as guilty as I am. You helped me. You were there." Nico cried, I know, and I'll never forgive myself." Then I entered. I said coldly, "It's over." They trembled with fear when they saw me. Marco tried to speak. Victor, we can explain." I shook my head. No more explanations. No more lies." I drew my gun and asked, "I just want answers. Why did you do all this? Stealing the product, blowing up the truck. I treated you like brothers. I gave you everything." Marco backed away and said, "You treated me like a servant, like I was beneath you. I was supposed to be your equal." I laughed bitterly. "My equal? You could never be my equal. You're not smart enough, not strong enough. You're just a petty, resentful man who destroyed everything because he couldn't stand to see someone else succeed." Marco shouted, "You'll never understand." I cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You're afraid of being nothing, afraid of being nobody, so you tear others down to feel bigger." Then I calmed down and lowered the gun. I said, "But I'm not going to kill you, Marco." He looked at me, shocked. I continued, "I'm going to let you live. You'll be hunted. You'll run for the rest of your life. You'll never rest, never trust anyone, never feel safe. That's your punishment." I dropped the gun on the floor. I said, "You're both dead to me. If I see you again, I'll change my mind, and I won't hesitate." I left them trembling. On the way home, I stopped the car at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the city. The sky was raining, sad music playing from the radio. I told myself, I thought letting them live was mercy. I thought it would hurt them more than death. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I looked at the stars, hiding behind the clouds, and remembered Damon's words. When you kill your cousins, you're not just killing them, you're killing yourself. The part of you that's still human. You'll never get it back. At that moment, I received a text message. I read it and knew that Marco and Nico hadn't run. They'd stayed, regrouped, and now they were coming for me. Marco called me at home. I was with Elena and my son. A moment of false peace. Marco said on the phone, "Victor, we need to talk." I said coldly, "There's nothing to talk about." He said, "I'm not asking, I'm telling. If you want your family to live, if you want your children to grow up, You'll meet me. Alone. I asked coldly, where? He said, the old warehouse, where we used to play as kids. Tomorrow night. Come alone, or your wife will be a widow. I hung up. Elena asked quietly, who was that? I said firmly, no one, just work. She tried to take my hand. Victor. I pulled away and said, I have to go. I'll be back tomorrow. That night, I stood before the old warehouse. Rain was falling, wind howling like hungry wolves. I carried a gallon of gasoline in my hand, not a gun. I opened the door and entered. The smell of gasoline filled the place before I opened the can, as if the warehouse itself had been waiting for this moment. The smell of an ending I thought I wanted, not knowing I'd smell it forever after. I heard Marco's voice from the darkness. Close the door. I obeyed. The dim lights came on, and I saw Marco and Nico tied to iron chairs in the middle of the warehouse. Their men had betrayed them and turned on them. Behind them, Damon Cross stood smiling. He'd arranged all of this. He'd brought them to him to betray them as they'd betrayed me. I approached them and unscrewed the cap of the gasoline can. I began pouring it around the chairs slowly, looking into their eyes. The smell of gasoline choked the breath, mixed with the stench of their fear. Marco tried to hide his fear with anger. What are you doing, Victor? You think this makes you a man? You're just a coward afraid of confrontation. I didn't answer. I kept pouring. Nico began to break down crying. He wasn't screaming. He was crying like a child, as if he'd returned to 15. Nico said in a broken voice, Victor, do you remember when we were kids? You used to carry me on your back when I got tired of walking. You used to tell me everything would be okay. What happened to us? I paused for a moment and looked at him. I said, you happened to you, Nico. You chose his side. Nico cried out loudly. I have a daughter, Victor. She's 4 years old. She calls me Daddy every morning. She doesn't know her father was a coward. She thinks I'm a hero. Please, let me watch her grow up. Just this once. I'll disappear. I'll go where you'll never see me again. Just don't make her grow up without her father. I stopped pouring gasoline. I looked at him for a long time, then said in a faint whisper, I have a son too, Nico. I don't even know his favorite color. This road stole everything from us, even the chance to be real fathers. I wiped a tear with difficulty, then turned to Marco. I said, do you remember the bread, Marco? When we were kids, we used to share it. You'd divide it into 3 equal pieces and say, each one gets his share. I believed in that. I believed we were partners, brothers, one shadow. But you forgot the bread, Marco. You only saw the crumbs. Marco laughed hysterically. Bread? You're talking about bread while we're here? You're a fool, Victor. A fool who never understood that life isn't bread and rosy dreams. Life is eat or be eaten. I chose to eat. I said coldly, and now you'll be eaten. I pulled the worn matchstick from my pocket. The same matchstick I'd carried since prison, since the days of the rusty truck. I struck it against the box, and it caught fire. The flame illuminated the scarred half of my face, and I took one last look at them. I looked at the burning match, then at Nico, who was now crying silently, then at Marco, who was trembling despite his anger. I tossed the match among them. The fire erupted. I heard screaming for a moment. Then the roar of the flames drowned everything. I closed the iron door, chained it, and sat outside on a rusty chair. I watched the fire through a small gap in the door. I saw shadows dancing, heard screaming turn to silence. Tears ran down my scarred cheek, but my face remained frozen. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned and saw the Baron standing there, looking at me with respect and awe. The Baron said, "Now you truly are a ghost." I looked at him, then turned back to watch the fire. I said nothing. I stood outside the warehouse, the fire behind me. Police sirens approached from every direction. I didn't run. I didn't flee. I heard Detective Harris's voice through a loudspeaker. "Victor Moreau, drop your weapon. Raise your hands." I had no weapon. I raised my hands. I thought to myself, I thought I'd feel something. Relief, anger, pain. But I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. Detective Harris approached and said, "You're under arrest. For smuggling, for murder, for everything." I said calmly, "I know." He looked at me strangely. "You knew we were coming?" I smiled slightly. I knew someone had to stop me. In the courtroom, I stood in chains. The judge looked at me and read the sentence. "Victor Moreau, you are hereby sentenced to death. Execution shall be carried out in 30 days. I showed no emotion. In the gallery, Elena screamed, crying, "Victor, how could you? I hate you, I hate you." I looked at her, then turned away. Here I am again, in my tiny cell, the worn matchstick gone with the fire. The rain still falls. I sat on the cold floor, my back against the concrete wall. In the corner of the cell, where the darkness was deepest, I imagined I saw that 16-year-old boy sitting there, looking at me with fear and curiosity. I tried to smile at him, but my scarred face wouldn't allow it. I whispered to him, "Don't do it, kid. Go home. Sit with your mother. Laugh with your friends. The price of the dream you're chasing is higher than your soul." But he didn't hear me. He couldn't hear anyone. Just like me, I told myself. And this is my story. I started as a child with nothing, and I ended as a man with less than nothing. I lost my family, my friends, my soul. I paused for a moment, then continued. I thought money, power, and respect would make everything right, but the more I got, the emptier I felt. And when I finally had everything, I had nothing. I looked at the window, then said, "What's the point of this story? Maybe this. The first lie is the easiest. The first betrayal is the hardest. But once you start, you never stop. You keep digging deeper and deeper until you can't get out." I smiled. I'm not asking for pity. I chose my path. I live with it every second of every day. But maybe someone else will hear this story and think twice. Then I laughed softly. Probably not. I heard the key turn in the lock. The guard said, "Time to go, Moreau." I stood and walked toward the open door. I said finally, "This is goodbye." Not the ending I wanted, but the ending I deserved. Victor the Ghost Moreau was executed. His associates were captured. Damon Cross is serving a life sentence. Hector Silva testified against the organization and entered witness protection. Marco and Nico Santoro are presumed deceased. Young Victor, happy, playing with his children. Elena watches, smiling. I hear Victor's voice say, "The only good thing I ever did in my life was leaving my children with a memory of their father playing with them in the yard. They were too young to remember it, but I do." He catches a toy and smiles. I don't know who you are or why you're listening to this story. Maybe you're curious. Maybe you're looking for excitement. Maybe you want to understand how humans turn into monsters. But I'll tell you one thing before you leave this tale. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's what they've always told us. But the more painful truth is that the road to hell is also paved with the small steps you convince yourself are temporary. Just once, you tell yourself, to solve this problem, then I'll stop. But you never stop. Because you discover that problems never end, greed is never satisfied, and the soul you sell can never be bought back. If I could go back in time, I would have told that boy sitting in his rusty truck, dreaming of a better future, that the price he'd pay was greater than he could imagine. But I can't. All I can do is warn you. Choose light, even if it's faint, because the ghost's shadow only lives in darkness. Stay away from crooked paths, even if they seem shorter, for quick endings often lead to long hells. This is what I learned, too late.